Hey folks, Trailblazer here with a BattleTech tactics video for you. I want to show you one of my favorite moves in the game, and one that illustrates the way that hovercraft armed with long-range missiles can be one of the most effective units on the offense. Now when we think LRMs, most of us think that's a great defensive weapon. That's a great weapon for sitting back in cover in protected terrain and waiting for the enemy to come to me. But as I'll show you in this video, when you mount those missiles on a fast hovercraft, like this missile variant of the Scimitar, which is one of my favorite level 1 units in the game, it becomes a really effective weapon for advancing against an opponent in the right terrain. Now, like any tactic that depends on hovercraft, this one is going to depend on the terrain that you are playing on, and some varieties of terrain are obviously terrible for hovercraft. But this one works on a fairly wide variety of maps. Basically, you want to use it on a map that has plenty of level 1 hills. So here we have a pretty typical example of the kind of situation where you would want to use this tactic. My forces on the southeast of the map are arranged in cover, and my enemy's direct fire forces on the northwest of the map are also in cover at a kind of healthy range from each other. We've got a bit of a Mexican standoff going on. We're shooting back and forth, and of course maybe you'll win, maybe you'll lose. There's going to be a lot of chance in this kind of a matchup as you roll dice to see who hits and who misses with long-range weapons. But what we also have in between us are some level 1 hills, and this gets to one of the few advantages that ground vehicles have over battle mechs, which is actually their short elevation. So if you park a tank or a hovercraft behind a level 1 hill, then that unit is going to count as invisible or obscure or out of line of sight to everybody that is on the other side of the hill. So as you can see here, I have the opportunity to move my hover tank in one turn into a position that's very favorable, that is in no danger from enemy fire since I'm totally out of line of sight, and has really favorable range modifiers to shoot my LRMs with indirect fire at the enemy. And of course, my mech forces in the southeast can spot for that LRM fire. I couldn't do this with a battle mech, even a pretty fast battle mech, because remember, in order to hide behind the level 1 hill, a mech would have to go prone, which then the mech would need a piloting skill roll if they wanted to stand up, which of course is a pretty unfortunate place to be in. And also they would suffer a negative modifier to their shooting. Advancing this way with indirect fire tanks puts your enemy in a really tough spot. They have two bad choices. Either they can move out of cover to try to attack the hover tanks, which is not going to be especially easy, it'll take multiple turns, or they have to sit back and just collect LRM fire with very little ability to respond. So it's an extremely effective way to get your opponent to have to move out of an advantageous position that they are in. In some situations you can pull a similar maneuver with a fast tracked tank. So for example, you might do it with a 30-25 Hunter, which is pretty good for these purposes. But in my opinion, you just can't beat the speed of the hover tank. As you can see from this image, it takes 10 movement points just for me to get into this position with my Scimitar. I couldn't do that in one turn with a Hunter. One of the less obvious consequences of what we've observed here is that attacking uphill in BattleTech can actually be much more advantageous than attacking downhill, at least if you're doing it with armored vehicles. Attacking uphill from a lot of the positions that you'll get into with your tanks, your opponent isn't going to have line of sight to your attacking tanks, which can allow you to advance with impunity. And if the tanks are armed with LRMs, like we've seen in this video, they can continue firing at your opponent as they go up the hill without being counterattacked. So if you haven't seen this move before, I hope it's helpful. I hope you can use it to put the hurt on your enemies the next time you play.